Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Sink or Swim, Supporting the Transition to New Manager. My name is Jessica. I'm on the marketing team with Biz Library, and I'll be the host for today's session. Before we get started, I want to go through just a couple of housekeeping items. First, what you should see on your screen. On the left-hand side of the screen, this is the webinar viewer, so this is where you'll see the content that we're sharing with you today. On the right-hand side of the screen, this is the control panel. So this is where you can join the audio portion of today's webinar, and you can also communicate with us through the question box. The default mode for the control panel is for it to collapse. If you want to open the control panel back up, simply click the orange box with the white arrow on it, and it'll expand for you. All of today's attendees are in listen-only mode. You can join the audio portion of today's webinar either through the teleconference line. You can also listen through your speakers. If you're going to listen through your speakers, I recommend either using a pair of headphones or a headset to get the best audio quality. We like to keep things pretty informal, so if you have any questions or discussion points or comments, feel free to send those over through the question box that's located within the control panel. I like to try to weave the questions in as it relates to the content that we're discussing in the webinar, and then I'll also leave some time at the end for Q&A. I am recording today's webinar, so I'll make a link to the webinar recording, as well as the slides and follow-up information available on our blog after today's session. So that's bizlibrary.com/bizblog. I'll also send an email out that'll include a link to the webinar recording, as well as the slides and follow-up information. If you'd like to download the slides for today, before we kick things off, I put a link to those in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Happy to say that today's session has been approved for 1 hour CE credit for all of you HR professionals attending. I'll make a link to the completion certificate available at the end of today's webinar. I'll also send out the completion certificate to all of today's attendees in the reminder email that you receive within 24 hours. That email will come through a GoToWebinar, so just make sure that you have that email address as a preferred email address. Sometimes it'll go to your junk and spam if you have it blocked. Again, my name is Jessica. I am on the marketing team with Biz Library. I graduated from the University of Missouri-Columbia with a degree in journalism. I've been working in the training and development industry now for about 5 years. Very active in social media, so I tweet on behalf of Biz Library at Biz Library, and then also on my own Twitter handle at JessLPetrie. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so I like to share a lot of articles and discussions around training and development, human resources, and marketing. So if you're on either of those social networks, would love it if you'd reach out and connect. Presenting with us today is Chris Osborne. Chris is the VP of Marketing for Biz Library. He's also worked in a consulting capacity with a Paris-based leadership development consulting firm where he helped organizations design and implement leadership and executive development programs. Chris has been performing learning, development, and training functions formally since 2000 and informally for organizations since 1987. Chris also taught courses on conflict resolution and discrimination at the HR management program at WashU in St. Louis. Prior to his move into the business sector, he practiced law in the areas of labor, employment, and business litigation for over 12 years. He graduated from WashU School of Law with honors in 1987. So here at Biz Library, we kindly refer to Chris as a recovering lawyer. Chris is also active in social media, so you can find him on Twitter at Chris Osborne STL, and he's also on LinkedIn, so I'm sure he'd love it if you would reach out and connect as well. All right, just to give you a little bit of background on Biz Library. Biz Library is a leading provider of online employee training and e-learning solutions. Our award-winning online content library contains more than 7,000 online employee training videos covering every business training topic. So that includes communication skills, leadership and management, sales and customer service, compliance training, desktop computer skills, and more. Biz Library's LMS, or Learning Management System, and social learning technology platform help HR and training leaders improve and manage employee learning. All right, so enough about us. I have a couple of poll questions to get things rolling for today. So you should see the poll pop up on your screen in just a minute. So So this first one is, so how would you describe your current training for new managers and supervisors? Is it A, fantastic, a process-driven, blended approach with targeted learning and competencies? B, good, we have a formal process and program, but I'm looking for some ideas for improvement. C, just getting started. We don't have a formal program in place, but usually we cover the basics. Or D, we throw them in and hope they know how to swim.
Hey, Jessica, how you doing?
Hey, Chris, I'm good. How are you?
I'm drowning in content here.
Drowning in content.
I have no idea how to swim.
Oh.
No, this is good. You do a really good job with these poll questions, and this is one of your better ones. I really like this one. It's always interesting to see where organizations are, the folks that attend our webinars. And this one I particularly like because, as I think we'll show when we get into this session, this is a really important piece of development and really could and should be important to organizations. So the fact that so few organizations really have a well-oiled machine, kind of a plan to get their new managers and supervisors up and running, it's not surprising that we'd get few people to tell us that, but hopefully by the time we're done today, we'll have some really good ideas for you to get one started.
Yep, sounds good. I'll go ahead and close out the poll, share the results. So it looks like we've got 37% say they throw them in and hope they know how to swim. I think that's the largest percentage that we've had that have been that honest. I would say that honest in a session. 35% said just getting started. 28% said good. None of our attendees today said they have a fantastic program, so I know we have some ideas that will help you move things along.
This is already maybe my favorite audience ever, because this is the most honest group I think we've ever had. But yeah, this is exactly where most organizations are, frankly. I mean, I think this is a very fair representation of the marketplace. I think, not quite a third have a process and program. Probably about a third are just kind of getting started, recognizing, hey, it's important, but where is it? And then, nearly 40%, 37% in our group just say, here you go. So hopefully we'll convince you to think about it a little differently. But the fact that you're here is great. So it means you're already thinking about it. Just, how are we gonna get you started? I think so. Good.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the speed at which most of us do business nowadays. It's like you can't spend a year or however long you're going to train your new managers when there's a need or there's an open position, or maybe it's some new business venture that you have. All right, I'll go ahead and hide this one. Next poll question is, what's the biggest challenge faced by new managers? Is it dealing with issues between coworkers, motivating team members, performance reviews, D, finding the resources needed for support, or E, creating career paths?
Yeah, and we're going to keep this one open for just about 60 seconds. So jump in and vote. And we recognize it could be some blend of these or all of these. We're just looking for what's the biggest challenge faced by your new managers. And I have my own. When I first entered management, I'll share mine with you all, but this was, again, and we didn't make this one up. This is from a poll, some data that we found when we were doing research to put this content together for you today. So interesting to see where this is going to play out here. I'm not surprised by these results either, Jessica. Are you? That what we're seeing show up here?
No, not at all, really. If you look at the majority are pointing to dealing with issues between coworkers, motivating team members, both of which are really, dealing with people, and that's a huge part of that transition. So you're going from where you're mostly focused on your to-do list or tasks or job duties to really, managing people. So that's a big part of it, and we'll get into that more in today's session. So I'll go ahead and close this out, share the final results. So we've got 29% of dealing with issues between coworkers, 30% motivating team members, 25% finding resources, 9% performance reviews, and 7% creating career paths.
Right. Yeah. Again, you hit it right on nail. You hit the nail right on the head. And so yeah, interesting. Again, I'm not too surprised by this. So yeah. So we'll cover all this as we move into today's session. So good stuff.
Yeah, so this actually came from a career builder survey. I changed out, so I didn't have the data in the the data in the slides because it's a little bit older of a study, but I just threw those numbers. If you want to compare, I threw those in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. All right.
Pretty close. They mirror pretty close what we found today. Not too far off, really.
Yeah, I would say the same. All right, Chris, I'm going to pass the presenter ball over to you if that's okay. We've got kind of 5 main areas that we're going to cover today.
Okay, and if things are going the way they should on my end, you should see those 5 areas on your screen. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are good to go.
Great. Okay, so Jessica's right. We're going to cover 5 things. And part of the challenge that your new managers face is the first thing we're going to talk about is this transition. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. We're going to talk about succession planning. Now, we have an entire webinar devoted to that topic, so we're going to cover this at a very high level. But this is extremely important to helping your managers transition. So we'll talk about how to broaden the succession planning program to maybe include this. Then we're going to talk about how to develop great managers. And we've got a couple of suggested resources for you here that you may not have heard of that I think are really extraordinarily good and free on top of that, some free things out there. And then we're going to talk about this management leadership mix. We spend a lot of time thinking about leadership development, what it takes to be a great leader, what we need to do to lead organizations. I've written a couple of posts, articles that are posted at LinkedIn about leadership. I love to think about leadership, but we can't focus exclusively on leadership. We still have to do the basics. We have to execute the fundamentals of management. So there's a mix, an appropriate mix of the two that we have to have. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about HR law and helping to prepare our newly promoted managers to actually supervise so they don't do something to create liability for us out there. So we'll spend just a little bit of time on that at the end toward the latter part of today's webinar. So Jessica mentioned that Career Builder survey. It was published in 2011, so it is a little older, but the data is fascinating. But I just love these 3 data points that Jessica pulled together for us today. 49% cite problems with direct supervisors as the reason that employees are disengaged. That was from an employee engagement person. Disengagement from Custom Insight. That was a survey that was published in December of 2012. Gallup publishes a survey every year about the state of the American workforce, and they cite very, very similar numbers that if the immediate supervisor or manager is dialed in and understands how to really lead and motivate employees, you see the level of active engagement go significantly higher. And employees that are actively disengaged, it's almost always attributed to the failure on the part of their supervisor. So this really makes a big difference. These next 2 pieces of information, 58% of new managers as of March 2011 got no management training. None. And then 26% of the managers that participated in that survey said they weren't ready for their new role. Those were alarming figures. I haven't seen anything out there that tells me that those numbers have improved. Now, they may have, but I haven't seen any data or research that tells me that they have. This is a great quote. If employees' relationship with their managers is fractured, then no amount of perks will persuade the employees to perform at top levels. Employee engagement is a direct reflection of how employees feel about the relationship with the boss. And that's from Self-Determination Theory and Facilitation of Intrinsic Motivation, Social Development and Well-Being from the American Psychologists Association. And I don't know if I can say that any faster. That is quite a mouthful. But the core thought here is spot on. That relationship between employee and manager is critical for engagement, for productivity, for turnover, for profitability. It's a whole range of bottom line business benefits that are straight line directly related from that relationship. And there is no relationship in your organization that is repeated at that level of importance with that level of frequency. Every employee in your organization has a direct boss with the exception of one. So this is a critical thing to get right. So we have to get our newly promoted managers ready to go. So Jessica mentioned this in passing, but this is a really critical way to think about what is happening here. As an individual contributor, we're focused on task accomplishment. We have things we have to do, and we do those every day. We're focused on them. This is what we're paid to do. We're paid to complete certain tasks, and there's incentives for them. This is how we're managed. This is what our performance is evaluated on. That's what we do, okay? But when we are elevated to a role of manager, there is a transition that happens. And our primary responsibility now shifts from task accomplishment to interacting with people. We have to motivate. We have to lead. We have to supervise. We have to guide their careers. We have to evaluate performance. We have to manage performance. We have the goals of an entire team now that we're responsible for. The source of this concept is from Bud to Boss, Secrets to a Transition to Remarkable Leadership by Kevin Eikenberry and Guy Harris. By the way, Kevin and Guy both maintain separate blogs. I read Kevin's blog on a regular basis. It's fantastic. I mentioned earlier we were going to give you some ideas on some really great resources that are free. Kevin Eikenberry posts some great material on his blog every week that provides super tips and ideas about helping navigate this very transition. I highly recommend his blog for anybody that's passionate or interested about this topic. Linda Hill is an associate professor at the School of Business at Harvard, and this is one of my very favorite quotes that we use in any webinar because it's just so profound. The transition from individual contributor to manager represents a profound psychological adjustment, a transformation as managers contend with their new responsibilities. New managers must learn how to lead others, to win trust and respect, to motivate, and to strike the right balance between delegation and control. It is a transition many managers fail to make. In fact, the failure rate for newly promoted managers within the first year or two is stunning. It's nearly 50%. Now, in what other portion of our business would we accept a failure rate of even 25% as acceptable? I can't think of one. I'm on the senior leadership team here at Biz Library, and we look at all sorts of metrics. And I know here we wouldn't accept a 25% failure rate in any particular area as acceptable. We're looking constantly to improve, and if we had an area that was performing that badly, we would certainly focus our energies and efforts to fix it. But 50%? But that's what happens. That's what happens. And Professor Hill does a superb job of explaining this is a psychological adjustment, and it really ties into what Jessica was talking about earlier, this idea of being an individual contributor focused on tasks to being a manager where you're focused on relationships between people. Jessica also mentioned in a past life I used to do organizational development and consulting work, and part of what we used to do was team building and some high potential development work. And some frequently in those high potential groups we worked with newly promoted managers or managers and supervisors that were about to be moved to more complex roles. And one of the things that we found over and over and over was a foundational disconnect, an emotional disconnect, I might add, on the part of these newly promoted or about to be promoted employees. And it had to do with how they self-identified themselves within the organization. And as an individual contributor, you're part of a team. You're part of your functional group. So you're an HR generalist. You're part of the HR team. You're a training specialist. You're an instructional designer. You're part of the training team. Or I'm a sales representative. I'm in the sales team. A customer service representative. I'm in the customer service area. And those are your peers. That's the team you're on. But when you get promoted to a manager, your direct peers, the team that you belong to, is no longer that functional group. Your peers, the team that you now belong to, are your fellow managers. And that's part of that psychological transformation that Professor Hill was talking about that so many managers fail to make. They do not make that shift. They continue to think of themselves as part of the functional team and not part of the management team. And that is an important shift that we have to help managers make. Jessica, I see a question that might be worth taking here.
Yeah, good question from Amanda. She asked, when so many companies have become lean with the current economy, how can you help managers understand the importance of letting go of that individual contributor mindset?
Well, that is a wonderful question. And this is not, if you go back to Professor Hill's quote, it's a psychological adjustment. Okay, so this isn't something that you just go in and tell people, you're not part of that team anymore, you're part of this team. It's not like in professional sports where you get traded, you just switch uniforms. It doesn't work that way. This is a process. It's a psychological process, and it takes time, and it takes support. So how do you do it? This is where succession planning really comes into play. You have to approach this as a process, and this is why we believe that succession planning is a key part and can play a key part in making this transition so successful. If we think about succession planning, not as replacement planning and not as just focused on the top layers of management in our organization, but as something broader, as helping us identify and prepare talent. So we have ready now talent throughout our entire organization to assume next level roles up and down our organization. Then succession planning becomes a key strategic element of our broader learning and development program. So it's about processes, and it's about planning. It's about putting a program in place that begins to prepare the participants to make that psychological shift. So Amanda, you're exactly right with the economy affecting things. We have a lot of outside influences, things that we can't necessarily control. So we really have to focus on the things that we can control, and that is we have to coach, we have to train, we have to counsel. But we can, to the extent possible, get a little bit ahead of this and begin to train and educate. And we can find people who are well suited for management. One of the things that we see happen over and over and over is organizations promote the best individual performer in a team to manager. That doesn't necessarily mean that that person had the right skills to be a manager, and that's part of what an effective succession planning program is about. It's identifying people who are well suited to be managers. This was a good, really interesting sort of chart or flow chart about succession planning for first-time managers that appeared in T&D magazine back in December of 2011. T&D, by the way, is the journal published by the organization that used to go ASTD, but it's ATD. And that's really what this was about. It's about consideration, exploration, then the transition once they're promoted into the role, and then helping them really take on that professional adoption of the role. And you notice that adoption, where they really assume the identity of that team, is 6 to 18 months out. So even in a well-done, well-prepared process, it takes time, a couple of years to really, from the time you really begin participating in a program to where you really self-identify yourself as a member of the management team. But a part of this is to weed out in your succession planning pool, your participants, people who are great individual performers and who should stay there in those roles from the people who have the temperament, the skills, the ability to lead and motivate others, because they are different skill sets. And that's part of why a succession plan is really important, so that you're promoting the right people into the right roles. And this is really a great way to think about it. I just thought this was a super illustration, and it really opened my eyes up. Intuitively, I understood this, and when I was doing consulting work, we used to talk to people about how to follow up with succession planning and how to coach and counsel once people are promoted. But I'd never seen it illustrated quite this effectively before I saw this article. So this was really some good work and some well thought out reasoning in this. And this is an article worth revisiting. I know it's a few years old now, but there's still some really good thought leadership expressed in that article. So when you're thinking about building that curriculum for your new managers, and this, you can begin doing this in that consideration phase and then keeping this going as you're moving through this, here are 5 key questions that you want to make sure you ask, think through carefully, and then answer. So you want to do this for each manager role and for each one of your managers. What is success? What does it look like? Okay, so what are the successful managers in these, at this level or in these roles? What is it that they do? What does success look like? What are the day-to-day behaviors that they're engaged in? How does that work? What are the skills, and at what level of mastery do they apply to those behaviors? What are the competencies? And how do I know that they're successful? How are there ways that we can measure that success? So what does it look like, and how will I know they're successful? And once you have those questions answered, then you're able to go through and identify those key competencies that they're applying. And I guarantee you it's not 10 or 12 key competencies. It's likely to be somewhere between 3 and 5. Here are the 3 to 5 things that the most successful managers in this department, in this area of our organization, repeat over and over and over that drive really good team results. What are the behaviors that support it? Again, what's success? What does it look like? How do I know it? And then what are the gaps? So in terms of our participants. And when I'm saying gaps, I'm not talking about anything other than the performance gaps. Where's the performance today, so the current level of performance, and compare that to the desired level of performance. And that forms your development plan. You plug the performance gaps by helping them understand how to improve the behaviors that support it, how to improve and understand and build the right level of mastery and the competencies, helping them understand how their performance is going to be measured, and helping define for each participant what success will be and how you're going to measure it, and define for them a picture of success. Does that make sense? Jessica, did I explain that effectively?
Yeah, you did. It was clear to me. If not, if to any of our attendees, just let us know in the question. I did get a question from FISA. If you're open to taking one right now, Chris.
Sure, of course.
So, how do you choose competent managers among many competent managers? So, for succession planning, or let's say for a new manager position. So, really, how do you decide who's going to be promoted?
You mean, how do you make the final promotion decision, or for participants in succession planning? Tell you what, let me answer both pieces of that question, because it's actually, Faiza, it's a great question. So I'm a big believer in broad inclusion in succession planning. I think sort of it's one of these things that's sort of the more the merrier in some ways, because if you're approaching succession planning with sort of answering these questions in mind, what are the downsides to inclusion? I don't really see many downsides to inclusion. The upsides are you're increasing the capacity and skill and ability of a much broader set of your organization, which is a good thing, okay? So I think I'm kind of in favor of broad inclusion and succession planning and development and sort of thinking with a future orientation about what the organization needs going out to be successful. I have my own philosophy about that, which we get into in the succession planning webinar. And then in terms of the final decision on who's going to be promoted, it's exactly the same as interviewing outside candidates. You interview them. You interview, your final 3 or 4 or 2, whatever candidates for the position, and you hire them for fit. You probably have 2 or 3 people who have comparable skills and qualifications and ability, but ultimately it's about fit. Who is the best fit for the role given the team demands and what has to happen, with the idea of, are they the best fit for success? Are they going to be able to deliver on that? And are they the best able to fill that? Are they the closest to filling the gaps between current ability and desired ability? Ultimately, that's the question. That's the way to do it. Those would be my recommendations anyway. And there's a whole range of ways to get at that. Those are simply my recommendations. Others may disagree, and that's perfectly okay. There are a wide range of valid, very valid ways to get at that. And in terms of determining fit, you can do assessments, you can do team interviews. There's a whole range of ways to do it. But my belief is that managers are most successful when they're a good fit for the role and the team. That's, at least in my experience, that's been the case. So, and based upon my personal success over the long course of, and I've been at this a long time, over the course of my career, I can tell you that when I've been most successful, that's been the case, when I've been a good fit for the role and the team. So anyway, that would be, for whatever it's worth, that's my recommendation. Okay, so we want to talk about how to develop great managers, and I wanted to talk to you again about another resource that we uncovered as we were doing research into this topic, and it's the American Management Association, and that's one of those, the AMA, and not the American Marketing Association, but the American Management Association. And I had stumbled across some of their articles in the past and read them and had always, bookmarked them and enjoyed them, but had never really explored and done research on their site until I found this, essentially. And at the American Management Association site, there's a lot of fantastic information about management models, management modeling, management development, management skills, and we found this fantastic, bit of information about why good managers are so rare. And it was that these are the 5 things that great managers are really built around, and it's so hard to find people that do these things really, really well. And when you look at it, you kind of understand it. But think about the great managers that you've seen in action in your organization over the course of your career, and it begins to make sense. But all of this circles around a commitment to continuous learning. So great managers motivate people. And it's not that they motivate people because of their title. It's not, I'm going to make you do this. They motivate people to do things on their own. They drive outcomes. These are result-oriented people. They're accountable. They take responsibility for both the, good outcomes, but most importantly, they take responsibility when things don't go well. They're good at building relationships. Ultimately, the workplace is about relationships. It's what it comes down to. They make decisions. How many times have you been frustrated with coworkers, with colleagues, with people in other departments, with people in other organizations who just couldn't make a decision? Just do something. Making decisions. This is such a critical thing that people need to be able to do, and I think it's a critical organizational competency as well. But again, this all circles around a commitment to continuous learning, and in this environment, this work environment, this economy, that is going to be more and more important with all the change, with all the volatility, with the complexity of this economy, this marketplace, with all the technology innovations coming our direction. We're going to need managers who are adaptable, who are flexible, who are agile, who can really adapt and change with the times. Okay, so I think this is going to be really important. But the American Management Association has some great information on this. So let's talk about each one of those. What does it take to motivate people? If you haven't read the book, Drive, by Daniel Pink, I highly encourage you to do so. The subtitle is The Surprising Things That Motivate Us. And it's a really interesting book, but he really talks about we're not typically motivated by extrinsic rewards. People perform best when they are intrinsically motivated. And that's what I was getting at with, with managers have to rely upon their title to get things done, they're not going to be a great manager. They're not a great leader. Great managers, effective leaders, motivate people to do things willingly. And they do this by effectively communicating a mission and vision. And that is explaining why we are doing things. Too many people don't do that. We need to explain to employees why we're doing things. You have to understand individuals. Having a high degree of emotional intelligence. There's some wonderful research out there that links success in business directly to highly attuned emotional intelligence. And when you read through some of that data, it is just striking. And it's some of that information when you read it, it's sort of like, well, duh, of course. And you know that data then is so valid. It just becomes so self-aware when you start to think about your own experience and think back to people who you've seen that have been successful, who you've worked with that have been successful. And it's this emotional intelligence component that really connects the dots across industries, across functional disciplines, across skill levels, across experience levels. People that have highly attuned levels of emotional intelligence do very well. So, and you can learn it, you can teach it, you can improve this skill. And last but not least, listening skills. We talk about communication at the top, but listening skills are extremely important. And I had to learn that the hard way over the course of my career. I always thought communicating meant talking effectively and clearly and explaining things well and teaching things. It took me a long time to understand that the most important part of communication is listening. But listening skills matter immensely. So the second of the 5 characteristics of great managers is they drive outcomes. And this is a really critical piece. Again, this is one of these elements where you kind of go, well, of course, this matters, but it comes in 3 different interesting components when you really start to break it down. And this handling difficult situations, in many ways, this is where our best managers really earn their money, right? When things get hard, when we're faced with dilemmas or puzzling situations, or something has happened where we have conflict or we're running headlong into a difficult competitor, whatever it is, this is when we expect our managers to really step up and make a difference. And how they do this matters. And it's the managers that do step up, and we're going to talk about accountability in just a second, but they step up. They're willing to step up. But most importantly, they want to step up and be in front and be in those difficult situations because it motivates them. They're challenged by this. They want to be there. This is an important component to this. Finding people who are determined, who find ways around difficult situations, who are not just shut down and stopped by them. This is an extremely important characteristic of great managers. Then a commitment to developing others. This is another piece of it. No team will succeed if everybody's development is flatlined because the manager doesn't take time to teach, develop, to motivate, to take care. And it's important that managers encourage that to happen, team member to team member. And then performance management. And I'm not talking about sort of rote performance reviews. I'm talking about understanding the elements of management, communication, engagement, that actually drive improved performance. How to delegate, how to make employees feel empowered so that they really can get out and make decisions on their own and take appropriate risks, and give employees freedom to fail so that they can learn and improve. That's what that's about. That's how great managers drive outcomes. Jessica, I haven't explained this slide quite in that way before, so I'm going to stop here and pause for just a second and let you comment. Was that a good explanation of this piece of it?
Yeah, and like you said, Chris, that you haven't quite explained it that way in the past, and the fact that a manager should want to be faced with those difficult situations. I think a question would be, so how do we prepare them to deal with it? So maybe the reason that they're not seeking it out is because they don't know what to do when they're faced with that difficult situation. So I think that looking at each of these kind of key competencies that we're outlining, so the 5 main things, and then under those you have things that could be considered supporting behaviors. So when looking to build out your training program or your curriculum, so look at how you can address that. So how can you help them know how to develop others? How can they deal with performance management? How can they deal with handling situations? Now, doing training on all of those things would be overwhelming, but what can you do, or what do you need most with that employee or that specific manager?
Yeah, that's you're exactly right, Jessica. You have to pick an area to develop and focus there and then move to the next one. That's exactly correct. No, good point. Good point. Good point. Okay, so then the third one is accountability, which ties right back into that, being motivated by challenges. One of the things that we see over and over and over, and I've been in organizations like this. Jessica mentioned I worked in a consulting company before where, consultants are really good at saying, well, I gave that advice. Accountability, I mean, how wonderful is it to work in an organization where something goes wrong and somebody sits at the conference table and said, yep, I did that. That was my decision. And it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. Here are the factors that went into the decision. They didn't, things didn't work the way we expected them to. So here are the 3 things we're doing to remedy the situation, and here's what we've learned, and we're looking forward. How refreshing is that to hear? And that's one of the great things about working here at Biz Library is there's a high degree of that kind of accountability with the senior management team. But what comes, the quid for that pro quo, so to speak, is the freedom that we have to be innovative and creative and be decisive and sometimes fall flat on our face, which we do from time to time. But the trick is to learn from that. And it's the same thing that great managers do for their employees, okay? It's okay to make a mistake, because if you're not making mistakes, you're not putting yourself out there and trying hard enough. But the trick is to have clear goals so people have a framework against which they can take appropriate risks and make decisions, okay? Then you have to delegate, and this is a hard thing for new managers to learn how to do. Give up, let go, trust. You have to trust the employees that work for you to do their jobs effectively and well, and trust that they're going to be dedicated to do a good job. Delegate, let them go, let them have it, and then be there to provide continuous, ongoing feedback. And by that, I don't mean micromanaging. Be there to support them, and that is a very difficult, fine line. And a lot of people are really good at it, a lot of people aren't, but that is a really, really difficult line. So if you're looking for a place where development for new managers would be a really good place to start, this would be one place that I would highly recommend. Emotional intelligence would be one, and this delegation and continuous feedback would be 2 and 3 in my mind. Helping your managers sort of give up. That is really, really important, I think, for new managers to get to. Jessica, there's a good question right on this topic, I think, from Kevin, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Yeah, good question from Kevin. He asked, as a leader, is being a working manager more important than delegating?
Sometimes. Kevin, it depends on the circumstances and what your organization needs from the role, okay? So let me speak from very personal experience here at Biz Library and what we do. I'm the VP of marketing, so I occupy a senior leadership role, but I definitely have to work. I have very definite deliverables that I have to provide to the organization and my team for everybody to be successful. And it's going to depend from organization to organization, from role to role. This gets back to what we talked about with those 5 questions to ask. What does success look like in the role? That's why it's so important to have that question answered with a high degree of clarity so that this accountability then is very clear. Everybody understands exactly what you're going to be held accountable for. Then you can make appropriate decisions about what can, and more appropriately, what should be delegated. I know it's not a real clean, bright line answer, but I really think that is the correct answer. Okay, so the 4th of the 5 characteristics of great managers is they build relationships. And again, going back to the idea that, management through title and leadership through title doesn't work very well. I could stand up in front of my team and go, I'm the VP of marketing, so we're going to do it this way. That doesn't work very well, especially against the strong personalities on my team. So how do we do this? Well, you win trust. You earn credibility. You communicate, which includes listening, and you encourage teamwork. It's about relationship building, especially in today's workforce. Great managers do this. A lot of them do it intuitively. A lot of them are wired to do this. A lot of them need help in training and development to do this effectively. But this is a really important piece of this puzzle. Great managers understand that the teams that they work with, this is a relationship-centric, dynamic, human, interactive, organic thing. It's not something that's rote. It's not robotic. It's not linear. And in order to make it work, as a manager, great managers understand that you have to approach this as a relationship-building exercise. And then last but not least in this area is making decisions. And sometimes you have to learn to make decisions when you don't have complete information. You just cannot get paralyzed trying to analyze. You have to just set priorities, be able to move forward on the right things, be able to think analytically, and help establish a focus for your team. But making decisions is really important. Another good question from Thomas, it looks like.
Yep, yes. How important is leading by setting examples?
I think it's the most important way to lead. And let me give you a specific illustration when we talk about the continuous learning, Thomas. This is I can say whatever I want about continuous learning. I can tell the team, guys, we got to do this. It's important. I expect everybody to train and grow and learn. But if I'm not dedicated to it, if I'm not personally and professionally committed to continuous learning, is anybody going to take me seriously? Do I earn their trust? Am I credible? Am I building effective relationships? Of course not. Leading by example is not optional in my perspective. I think it's absolutely critical. And this is an area where great managers really set themselves apart. And we mentioned earlier about the learning agility, being able to make decisions in unfamiliar situations. That's what the competency learning agility is all about. It's a really interesting thought leadership out there about that. But these are people that are consistently curious. Jessica and I think one of the reasons that the two of us get along so well, we both read and explore all kinds of different things, and it's really important. You have to do that, particularly in this marketplace. There's all kinds of interesting things happening, so get out there and find them. Your great managers are doing that. They're bringing ideas back to the team, to the organization, and for themselves, ways to improve and build their own skill set and do all kinds of things, and then ask for questions. So, the way to learn, the way to build a continuous learning environment is to learn while you work while you learn. And for us in organizations, we're only limited by our own imaginations here. Job rotation, action learning, mentoring programs, these aren't expensive pieces to put into place, and we can do this. Then there's this leadership management mix. I mentioned this at the outset. This is a real critical part of this in learning to separate the two. Peter Drucker describes leadership as doing the right things and management as doing things right. You have to have both. So you teach your leaders to articulate a vision, inspire commitment. Management is about working within procedures and focusing on short-term results. So you have to find that balance for your newly promoted managers and develop both in the right mix. Again, what does success look like and how will I know it? So what is it that I need in this role? There's that quote from Peter Drucker, which I totally love. And there's all kinds of interesting new leadership models that are beginning to emerge, and we like this one, the social leader. Part of why I like it so much is it really looks a lot like that great manager model. These are people that engage, they build networks, they share, they influence, are committed to continuous learning. They're socially literate, and they facilitate learning. So what's the leadership model that's right for your organization? What is it that your organization needs for success, both today and tomorrow? It may or may not be social leadership, but that's going to be an important question that you need to ask yourself as you begin to organize and think about development in that appropriate mix. Okay, I mentioned we were going to talk briefly at the very end of today's webinar about legal compliance. This is important. You do not need, however, you do not need to turn your managers into HR law experts or legal experts. What you do need to do is make sure that they understand that they have certain responsibilities and how to exercise those responsibilities when things happen. A lot of times the responsibility is to recognize, whoop, somebody's got a sexual harassment complaint, I call HR. Somebody's asking for time off and I think it has to do with their family, I need to call HR. But these are 6 areas where we can get our organization and ourselves sideways: harassment, disability, substance abuse, privacy, FMLA, workplace violence. And this is an area where there is no substitute for good, well-vetted, subject matter delivered training. So again, this is an area not to overlook, and you definitely want to make sure that you get this done. But the trick to being in compliance with this alphabet soup of rules and regulations is really to focus on good, sound management practices. If you'll do that, the odds are really good that your organization and your managers are going to keep you in compliance. Okay, so 3 key points that I think are good takeaways for today. The transition to new manager is difficult, and helping prepare them and planning ahead, you can help your employees succeed. And succession planning is a big part of that, and that's why we think it's important to look at succession planning not as just at the top leadership level of your organization, but also for that entry-level, first-level managers as well. I mean, look at succession planning across all levels of your organization. And then build a curriculum and development plan or program based upon what success looks like in your organization. So make sure that it includes management and leadership competencies and just the basics of HR law. Jessica, I'm going to get a quick drink and turn this over to you, and we should have a little bit of time for questions, and I think we're in pretty good shape.
Lots of information. Again, I know we shared a ton of resources. I'm going to post those up on the blog so you can reference them later. So again, a lot of questions have come in, so keep them coming. I do have a couple of additional resources that I'll outline and recommend. This first is you can download the slides so you can look at this, but it's just to get started on building a new manager curriculum. So, you can outline it by the learning objective, the time frame in which you want to implement it, and then align different development activities. So for this one, I've outlined them for 30 days, bi-weekly, 90 days, and then I've aligned Biz Library content to it. So there's a mix of both video and more traditional e-learning courses included in that curriculum. A couple of other resources I recommend, a short video on going from coworker to boss. This video is really focused on the supervisory aspect of things. So if someone that you used to work with and was your peer breaks the rules, how do you approach that situation? So again, giving them the tools they need to approach those difficult situations so they're confident. The other one is what to say when, haunted by the ghost of your predecessor. So as they're moving up to this position and they're sitting in a meeting and all they hear is the name of the person that had that position before them, help them approach that and how to get over that that difficult situation. And then the last one is we have a entire series on HR law for managers, so it can help you get that out to your managers quickly, and so they have a good foundation of what they need to know while managing people. All of those resources are included in the Biz Library collection. So there's over 7,000 courses, e-learning and videos, 25 topic areas, unlimited access. So if you want to try out any of the resources that I recommended today or any other resources, you're welcome to do so. I'll put a quick poll up and just let me know that you're interested in doing a trial or trying them out. All right. Some good questions, Chris. I have one from Carrie that I think I'm going to try and slightly paraphrase, so hopefully I do it okay. But Carrie's a new manager, or a newer manager, and she's getting feedback from upper management that says, we really want you, they call it SOAR, we want you to take initiative, but then when she goes to try to implement something or implement a new program or take initiative, it's shot down because it's not from someone in upper management. So how can you help a new manager balance that drive and initiative when they're not getting support from upper management?
Oh, Carrie, you're in a really tough spot, aren't you? I read that question, and I'm kind of going, I bet Jessica's going to pick that one because it's a really hard one. That is a really, really tough situation, and this is one of these deals, and we actually have a little bit of content about how to manage up, and that's really what you're in here. You're going to have to manage up a little bit. And there is no easy answer to this. I'll just be real honest about it. You're working in a remote office. Your manager isn't close by, and they're shooting down everything you're doing. This is a command control problem. Somebody feels like they have to have a lot of control over what's going on. So this is going to be one of these situations where you're simply going to have a courageous conversation and find out exactly what they mean by SOAR and be prepared to provide very specific examples and, you know, explain, you know, I really want to do these things, but here are times when I've done what I thought you wanted and I've been shot down. So help me understand what success in this instance looks like to you, and pick it up and go from there. And if it's not comfortable, if that doesn't work, then you know you've got other options. But that's really what you're going to have to do, is get them to define for you what quote unquote SOAR looks like, and give them specific examples about ideas that you've provided that got shot down and then came back repackaged later. There isn't an easy answer to that one, but that really is what you're going to have to do.
All right, good question. Let's see, one more question, and then we may have to take some of these other ones offline or do a video blog for them. This one comes from Helen Ann. So she asks, we typically send new managers to an all-day training, but there's no follow-up. So how can we implement an ongoing development curriculum?
Helen, it's a great question, and yes, you can. This is where technology-based training can really make a big difference. And Jessica, I saw you just chimed in there with Brian. Helen Ann and Brian both, I would encourage you to jump onto that poll that Jessica's got open and sign up for the free trial. Technology-based training can really be a great addition to instructor-led classroom training all-day sessions. So you bring your new managers in, you spend a half a day with them, you lay out what you're expecting, what you want them to do, and then you can follow up with technology-based training. Send them 2 courses at a time, a course at a time, that reinforce the lessons that you've provided, and then teach their managers, their supervisors, to keep the conversation going and communicate with them via email, pick up the phone, have follow-up conversations to talk about ongoing content that you can continue to feed them online, so they don't have to come back in, they don't have to leave their desk. But that's a great way to blend a technology-based follow-up methodology with the sort of face-to-face conversations that a lot of new managers benefit greatly from. Now obviously I'm a big fan of online training, but this is a really good blend and a great opportunity to think creatively about blended solutions.
All right, so there's 2 other really great questions that I don't know that we'll have time because I need to do the wrap-up for credit. So Chris will likely address these on the video blog either later this week or next week, if that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Margarita, you have a great question. We'll put that on the video blog. And Teresa, your question, we're going to answer that on the video blog as well. So stay tuned. We'll get those out there, if not later today, then tomorrow. But thank you all so much for attending today. Great questions, loved it, and really appreciate your interest in the topic today.
Yep, and so just for those of you that are attending for HRCI credit, I put a link to the completion certificate in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll also email out the completion certificate to all of today's attendees in a follow-up email that you'll receive within 24 hours. Next week's webinar is on next generation learning strategies, so I hope you'll consider joining us again. We do these webinars every week. They're free to attend, and they are HRCI approved. Again, I'll post all of the webinar recording, slides, follow-up information on our blog after today's session. So that's bizlibrary.com/bizblog.